For the last few months, something's been trying to get inside my house. I'll never forget the day it all started. I was heading to college, but that came to an abrupt halt when my dad passed away unexpectedly during finals week due to complications from COVID-19. It had taken a lot of thought and prayer for me to even decide to go to school, especially after losing my mom a few years before. The school I'd planned on attending was out of state, and I wasn't about to leave my dad alone in the house. The only reason I was okay with going was that my two good friends, Matt and Jake, agreed to move in with my dad while I was gone. I'll always be grateful to them for that. To make a long story short, I ended up blowing all the savings I had set aside for school on legal fees and funeral costs. I have 3 older half-brothers from my dad's first marriage, so we had to split up whatever was left of his belongings. When all was said and done, the only thing I had left was about $10,000 from my mom's life insurance and my dad's savings, along with a small cabin up in the Upper Peninsula. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere, down some unnamed road, about 45 minutes from the nearest town. The only sign of civilization within a 20-minute drive was a bait and tackle shop that also sold booze. You couldn't even spot the driveway unless you knew exactly where it was, tucked away in thick brush. The road leading to the cabin was nothing but ruts and tree roots, and it took about 15 minutes just to drive down it. The cabin itself wasn't much, about 900 square feet. It had a kitchen that doubled as a dining room with a wood-burning stove, a living room with an old couch and fireplace, and a bedroom with a quadruple bunk bed with full-size mattresses. You could probably walk from one room to the next in 5 decent steps. The sink had an old hand pump that drew water from the river. The only bathroom was an outhouse, or, if you were lucky, Mother Nature. There was a gas stove for cooking, a fridge that looked like it was from the 80s, and a single gas-powered light by the front door. Even though the cabin was wired for electricity, the only way to get power was from a generator. So, I knew with my tight budget, I wouldn't be running that very often. After the long, nearly 10-hour drive with my 13-year-old lab, Ella, I finally made it there, though I missed the driveway at least 10 times. I managed to get my 98 Cavalier down the road and looked at my radio. It was 10:23 p.m. It was the middle of May, and my girlfriend, Christine, had just broken up with me. She couldn't deal with me drinking to fill the hole my mom and dad's passing had left. I don't blame her. I chose the bottle over healing. Plus, she was off at college over 1,000 miles away, so that didn't help either. So now, it was just me and Ella, completely alone. Sure, Matt and Jake had offered to move in with me the way they did for my dad, but I didn't want to completely disrupt their lives. Matt had just become the plant manager at a small company, and Jake was engaged. I wanted to be by myself anyway. I was in a pretty dark place. I unloaded the car, let Ella run out to the trees to do her business, checked the gas lines, and made my bed. I glanced at my phone, 10:52 p.m., and then headed out to leave it plugged into the car overnight, so I wouldn't have to run the generator. Outside, everything was eerily still. The wind that had been rustling the pines had died down. The river, which normally had a steady flow, wasn't making a sound. The animals were all silent. It felt like I was in a tomb. I almost wished I could hear coyotes in the distance, or the crack of a twig under a raccoon's feet. Anything to break the heavy silence. Even Ella, my brave dog, was stiff and still, like a corpse. I went back inside, locked both doors, covered all the windows, and even shut the chimney vents. I don't know why, but something inside me told me I needed to make sure there were no possible ways for anything to get inside. By the time I got into bed with my bottle of whiskey, the clock read 11:11. I had just cracked open my bottle when I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap on the window near my bed. I froze. Ella held her breath. I waited. Tap, tap, tap. I hoped it was just a tree branch. I prayed it was nothing. Then it came again, but this time it was at the living room window. Tap, tap, tap. It continued like this until whatever it was had made its way to the front door. Thump, thump, thump. The doorknob started shaking. The screen door slammed open and shut over and over. I'd watched enough horror videos to know better than to get up. I made a mental note that I was definitely getting a firearm the next day. There was no way some crazy local was going to get the best of me. The clouds parted, and the full moon's light shone through the trees. That's when I saw it. Through the bedsheet I'd used to cover the kitchen window, I saw the shadow of something. The shape of antlers. It looked like a deer standing on its hind legs, trying to get a better view. Then I heard it, like a man who's smoked way too many cigarettes. Hello? I started crying, wishing my dad were there. I knew he wouldn't have been able to do anything, but I needed him. This went on for exactly an hour, until 12:11 a.m. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I stayed in my sleeping bag, frozen in fear. At 2 a.m., I quietly crawled out of my bag and tiptoed to the silverware drawer. It creaked as I opened it, and the sound made me feel sick. I grabbed an 8-inch chef's knife and brought it back to bed with me. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't do anything to protect me, but it was enough to stop me from crying. It didn't, however, give me the courage to sleep. The next morning, Ella and I drove the 45 minutes into town. I picked up some necessities: 6 sheets of 1-inch plywood, a few 2x4s, nails, a week's worth of whiskey, canned goods, dog food, and 4 deadbolt locks for the doors. Surprisingly, the hardware store also had a gun section, so I grabbed a 20-gauge over and under shotgun along with some ammo. The girl behind the counter rang me up, and I decided to make small talk. "Ever had any strange things happen around here?" I asked. She shrugged. "Not really. Just some odd hunting or snowmobiling accidents." "Any cabin break-ins?" I asked. She paused, then stopped ringing me up. "A few? Why do you ask?" I decided that was the end of the conversation. I didn't want her to think I was some drunk guy who'd just moved in to rob cabins. On the way back, I saw a truck pull into a hidden driveway on my road. The driver flagged me down, so I stopped. He got out, and we started talking. "You new around here?" he asked. "Yeah. Just moved into the cabin up the road last night," I replied. He stared at me, not in a threatening way, but more like he was sizing me up, trying to figure out if I'd make it here. "I'm Jim." "You?" "Ben," I said. "Don't go outside after 11 p.m., Ben. The beast won't like it." I spent the rest of the day boarding up the windows. The only window that wasn't sealed up with plywood was the one over the sink. I still boarded it up, but used 2x4s-like bars. I made sure everything was as secure as I could. Jim even stopped by to help me get my 420-pound propane tank refilled in town. That night, after I fed Ella and had a dinner of canned stew and half a bottle of whiskey, I made sure both doors were locked and all the boards were in place. Ella and I had both gone outside, and when 11:11 rolled around, it started again. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping began on the outside wall, right next to my head. The alcohol buzz wore off instantly. The temperature in the room dropped. Ella was shaking, hiding under the blanket. Then I heard it. "Hello? Hello? Ben? Let me in, Ben." It's so dark out here. It knew my name. This time, it was at the barred window. Why'd you board up the windows? I saw you do it. At the back door. Rattle, rattle, rattle. Thud, thud, thud. That's when I realized it. The smell. It was a stench like body odor and rotten meat. The whole cabin was filled with this foul, rotten odor. It was so strong that I could feel the whiskey rising in my throat. Ella was dry heaving and pawing at her nose. After one final slam on the front door, I heard it. Jim looked at me and said, "This isn't good, Ben. The beast knows about you now. It's hunting you. It knows you're vulnerable." This routine continued every night, like clockwork. For months, the beast tormented me. 1 hour, every single night. By November, I had replaced the 2X4S with rebar and swapped the bed sheets on the windows for blackout curtains. I even picked up a part-time job at the paper factory in town. The pay was crap, but it kept Ella and me fed, the propane tank full, and the guns loaded. Over these months, Jim became my only real friend. He'd given me a handgun to keep on me at all times. He said he wouldn't miss it, and I believed him. The guy had an arsenal that would have had the ATF knocking on his door if we didn't live in the middle of nowhere, a place that seemed to exist just for hunting and isolation. I even traded the over-and-under shotgun for a pump-action 20-gauge with a 6-round capacity. At least the forest provided fresh meat. The river offered up fish. Nature had fully taken me in, like a generous, tough old matriarch. I know what you're thinking. Why would you stay there? My answer? I didn't have anywhere else to go. My family had cut me off. The only ones left were dead. And at this point, my routine felt safe enough. Jim had told me that the beast could only get in through an open or unlocked door or window. It followed strict rules. It was Thanksgiving, and the forest was buried in snow. By 4 p.m., it was already dark. The cashier who'd rung me up all those months ago, Connie, had become my girlfriend. She invited me and Ella to her parents' house for dinner. I locked up the cabin, made sure the gas light was off, and left. My old '98 Cavalier was a wreck. The radio was shot, so I sang Christmas songs to Ella all the way to Connie's place. I'd brought a venison loin from a doe I'd taken earlier that week and some pike fillets. Connie had made sweet potato pie, corn casserole, and something she called chicken dish. Connie asked, "Why don't you ever take me to your place?" I shrugged. "You don't want to. The only toilet is an outhouse, and the hand pump's frozen." I hadn't told her about the beast. I didn't want her to think I was some alcoholic nutcase. Jim had made me promise never to bring anyone to the cabin. It wasn't safe. Connie smiled. "I don't mind. Besides, I can't make you thankful with my parents in the other room." That was it. I'm not proud of it, but I agreed. She could come out for the night, as long as I followed my routine. I'd survived this long, right? Surely nothing bad would happen. We drove deeper into the woods, the snow slick and deep, so I took my time. I kept checking the time, watching it creep closer and closer to the hour the beast would arrive. I decided to take a slow route and, accidentally, missed a turn. I managed to keep us away from the cabin for the full hour of the beast. I felt pretty good about it, until I pulled up to the cabin. The door was wide open. Through the vents in my car, I could smell the stench of rot. The beast was inside. My heart pounded. I locked the car door. I knew I had locked the cabin door. I always did. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw a large pine tree crash down across the driveway with a groan and a bone-rattling crack. Connie spoke in a hushed voice, as though she were holding her breath. "Ben, Something's really wrong here. Stay here, I said. I'm going to check it out. I didn't want to check it out. I was certain this was the end for me. It seemed almost poetic. Just as my life was beginning to settle, some nightmare would be the thing that finished me. I thought about calling Jim, but he'd be asleep by now, and there was no way he'd get down the driveway in time. I was going to have to face this on my own. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, got out of the car, and started creeping up to the cabin. The clouds had stopped the snow, almost like they were waiting for something. The icy wind bit into my face, and the cold seemed to seep into my bones. Then I heard the sound of glass shattering. I spun around, pistol drawn, and saw him. The beast. He wasn't in the cabin, though. The beast had broken through the passenger side window and was pulling Connie through, slashing her on the jagged glass. Ella had a hold of his bicep, but he swatted her away. I heard her neck snap with a sickening schlunk. He looked like a twisted, bent old man, completely naked, his skin glistening under the moonlight. From the waist up, he looked like a deer suffering from chronic wasting disease. His body was smeared with blood, scum, and filth. He turned to face me with milky, dead eyes. "Ben," he said, his voice hollow. That was all he said. I started firing at him. A few of the bullets hit, but it was too late. He was already dragging Connie by the hair into the trees, just out of sight. I could hear the sickening sounds of him beating her, like a wet sack of potatoes hitting the ground. I heard her scream for me. And then I heard it stop. With one final sickening schlunk, I knew she was gone. I went inside, grabbed my shotgun, and walked out. I was going to end this. I entered the trees and found the mess. The beast was hunched over on all fours, burying his face into Connie's chest, which had been torn open. Connie's lifeless body almost looked like it was pleading with me. I looked at the beast, but his deer head lay discarded in the snow. That's when I saw it. The unmasked beast. It was Jim. Jim, the guy who had helped me fortify my cabin. The guy who had helped me install the deadbolts. He must have stolen my keys to the cabin during his last visit. He had set this trap. He turned to look at me. Tears streamed down his face as he continued swallowing chunks of Connie. I raised my gun. There would be no tears from me. No sorrow. I was numb from the cold and from the emptiness that had settled deep in my soul. Jim whispered, "Please, Ben! Please! Kill me!"